Hodu la yawa ki tov, ki le olam hazdo. So that event was Yahweh's personal design. He wants us to do that every year, the first day of the 7th month, at the new moon. There's this picture on the chart of a watchman on a watchtower. So picture, this isn't a spear, it's a hoe. There's a reason for that, there's a word. But Yeshua set us over his vineyard. What are we watching for? It's like a lifeguard. To be alive and vigilant, watching over. What's going on down there? That's the word shemer. To watch, keep, and guard. These happen to be the words of the Shema. This is something we had for the week of the letter Tet, the 9th letter. At the printer now, we're working on revising these letters so that these shields end up looking like they're three-dimensional reliefed letters of different scriptures written in the Paleo. That'll be hopefully in a couple weeks. The idea of this hoe has to do with a word that we'll get to in a few minutes. Yeshua gave parables about good stewards, about those who were entrusted to watch over his vineyard, and that one day he would come back and hold them accountable. It was even a story about how one of the parables was that the master of the vineyard sent his servants to come check on the keepers of the vineyard, and they ended up getting beaten up and run off by the people who were supposed to be, they had been given the principality, the jurisdiction to look over the vineyard. And finally the master sent his own son, thinking certainly they will regard my son. And when the son showed up, the keepers of the vineyard said, "Hey, this is the guy's son. If we kill him, we'll get the inheritance." Problem is, the son came back to life. They don't get the inheritance. They get the curse. I'm showing you this for a reason. You see, we read these stories and we don't have much of an image. But to have an image of some guy sitting here looking kind of crazy is like, maybe that'll stick in your head. We've got a responsibility over the garden of our master, Yahweh. Our shield is his word. If we have the word, we have the defense. We are up on the engineered structure, like this ladder is a Samecx. It's a watchtower. It's a lighthouse. It's where those who are keeping his words have a position of responsibility and authority. And they have been bequeathed by the word of Yahweh to have jurisdiction. That would be the letter Lamed. If we Lamed the Kaf. The Kaf? The Kaf is the letter Kaf is the open hand, remember? The lines of instruction, the gift, which is our covering, as it were, our helmet, the lines of the Torah. He gave us his Kaf. And if we would Lamed, teach and learn, the Kaf, the letter Lamed is the 12th letter. It speaks of authority, of government, of jurisdiction. If you want the authority as one put in a position to be responsible, you have to be responsible with the words he gave. If you say, those words? They were done away with. What words do you have? Well, let's just make something up that feels good. you have no authority. You change the words, you have no authority. If you want the authority of one who's watching over his vineyard, over his grounds, we've got to regard the things that give us the authority. The purpose of this class is to regard the words that give us the authority. So this image of sitting up here with this is just to stick in your mind. The interesting thing about Greek, you can find this online, but I'll show you. If you take the aleph in Hebrew, Greek and Latin, it's turned that way, and it's alpha. And this is aleph. If you take the bet, they turned it around. Boy, I can't even write a bet hardly anymore. The letter in Greek would be like that, and it's a beta. They changed all the letters around. But the Greek and Hebrew are very similar because Greek came out of Phoenician, and Phoenician is actually Hebrew. It's the ancient Hebrew. So the Samecx in Hebrew is like that, whereas the equivalent letter in Greek is like that. I believe it's sigma, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look on the chart, which we don't have up here. There's two letters that start with an S. Anyway, the point about that is to show you what the letters look like. So the modern letter in Hebrew looks like that. The final mem basically looks like that. And you could say, well, that's awfully close, especially sometimes, they'll draw it like that, or they'll maybe draw it like that. And the final mem sometimes is drawn like that. And they're almost impossible to tell the difference apart in the modern. The Sophite mem and the Samecx. But the Sophite mem only comes at the end of the word. But in Paleo, it's basically 3 lines and the vertical. On the chart we have out there, there's some other ways to draw the ancient letter of the Samecx, and one of them is like that. You can say, well, that's kind of the same thing. There's a concept that modern engineering, we're so far advanced, they certainly didn't have some of the apparatus that we have now. For example, the 3 basic, you might say, inventions of engineering design is the wheel, the lever, and the inclined plane. The inclined plane basically is, if you have something on this level, is this in everybody's way, or? If you have something on a horizontal place and you want to get it vertical, you make a ramp. And so you push it from here up there, and the inclined plane makes it real easy. A screw nut is exactly that concept. So you have a bolt with each set of teeth, as it were, as an inclined plane, and then when you put a hex nut on it, and you screw it down, it tightens up pressure. It's the principle of an inclined plane. The concept of a propeller is the concept of an inclined plane that'll cut through the water, and it forces one direction while going another direction. So you could push this direction, horizontal, and it makes it go this direction, is the concept behind the lever. So you might say, well, they didn't know about propellers. They had oars, and they had rudders. But the Phoenicians, where did they come from? Stephen Collins did a bunch of research where the Phoenicians actually were called Phoenicians only after the era of David and Solomon's kingdoms, which were approximately 900 BC. So Stephen Collins' research is that David consolidated the kingdom with the 12 tribes, handed it over to Solomon. Solomon, because Yahweh blessed him, he didn't have wars, but he built the military, and he had huge taxes. And his friend was this guy Hiram, king of Tyre and Sidon, who was a shipping empire, who built incredible ships with the cedars of Lebanon, and the ships would go around the world in the era of 900 BC. We don't hear about this. Hence the word Brazil, South America, is the word iron in Hebrew, Bet Resh Zion Lamed. Stephen Collins writes how copper was mined from the Great Lakes region of the United States and taken back to southern Israel, blended with tin that they got from the British Isles to make bronze. The word British, just as a little picture, right? You have Brit-ish. Does anybody know what that would be in Hebrew? The word Brit is covenant, which is Bet, Resh, Yod, Tav, and the word Ish is man, which is Aleph, Yod, Shin. Brit-ish, covenant man. Now, did some Hebrew call them the British Isles, or did that come from somewhere else? You could say, oh, come on, that has nothing to do with anything. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The point is, there's another word, to be wrapped up. To be wrapped up is spelled Samecx, Gimel, Resh. Cigar. Cigar? How do you make a cigar? You wrap up the leaves. A cigarette is a small version of that. It's something wrapped up. It's like, so is cigar Hebrew? There's another word. One thing I'm working on just for a couple weeks from now, and the letter Zadi, just so you know, we're trying to go with a few things here. Over the weekend, let me back up. A couple years ago, I was looking for 50 words of Yahweh's Shem, Yahweh's name, the description of Yahweh's character, 50. For example, Yahweh Elohim Savaot, that's one description of him. El Elyon, which is to say the Most High, that's one description. El Shaddai, the Almighty, that's another description. Ash Akal, the consuming fire, that's another description. And so I found 50 of these, and I put them on a deck of cards, and the cards need to be refined a little bit, but we'll have them out here one of these days. The point is, I was looking back over them over the weekend and thought, I'll consolidate these and put them in a little bit more apprehensible form. Because 50, separate lines. And that's where I came up with 4 words for the word creator. But there's another place where he's called El Gabor. Has anybody ever heard of El Gabor? Mighty God. Let's look at the word Gabor. Does anybody know anybody named Gabor? Eva Gabor, Zsa Gabor, right? Yeah. Was she Jewish? She was Bavarian. I don't know. But Gabor is a Hebrew word. So if you look up Gimel Bet Resh, page 90 in the Red Dictionary here, down here in the center of the page, it says, Gabor means to be strong, to overpower, grew mighty, increased, prevailed, behaved himself proudly, strengthened himself, gathered strength, man, male, warrior, hero. It's also a cock and a rooster. You notice the way they behave. So why would El Gabor, is that God-man? What does it mean? Or does it mean, the man aspect about it is, what's the difference between Ish, Aleph Yod Shin, man, and Gabor, man? Because Ish can be a strong man, but Ish is simply like mankind. Anash is also, I believe, is another word for mankind. The point is, in Hebrew, there's different words that mean the same thing, similar to in English. And you have to sit here and say, El Gabor is mighty God, right? Mighty El. Well, it's not just mighty, it's to strengthen and increase. But it's also man. So how would you strengthen and increase yourself? Now remember, you have the inclined plane. If you want to increase, you do a lateral force this way, and with the inclined plane, you go vertical while you're putting the force sideways. That's the way it's a principle of engineering. So there's certain words, my notes are so scrambled. Sorry about that. There's certain words which that's what they mean, is inclined plane. It would be too hard to try to figure these things out. Gosh. Anyway, The point about this propeller, it's a picture of motoring, of turning this direction so you can go that direction. The festivals happen every year. The Shabbat happens every week. It's this circular picture of motoring, of sustaining, of just do this. Could it be that Yahweh gave us this method of samecxing by motoring, by just turning around? In which case, if you looked at the wake, the pattern of the turbulence in the water while the propeller was turning, it would look kind of like that, like the old-time Samecx. But yet if we think, oh, well, they didn't have propellers back then because propellers come off a drive shaft which is turned by an engine. We don't know what those guys had. We didn't even know that those Phoenicians went around the world, much less what their propelling mechanism was. Yeah, they had sails. Yeah, they had oars. But maybe they had some other kind of device to move them along. Would a propeller, which was one of the most primitive forms of engineering to be devised by mankind, be beyond the scope of them thinking about it? In which case, this pattern of the Samecx that even the Greeks had is kind of a picture of this propeller turning. If you think of the letter Samecx as this ship's mast, or as this propeller turning, or as the good steward doing justly, on the chart we have three things in a triangle. There's the Samecx, the Ayin, and the Pei. Many years ago, there was a car company that had a rotary engine, and it worked in a triangle. Instead of being a block with cylinders going vertical with the pistons going up and down, this thing turned, and the firing would happen each time the piece of the triangle would come around to where the spark plug was. The concept with Samecx, Ayin, Pei working together is that, again, to reiterate what I said just previously, you have the big white fence. You choose to come into the kingdom of Yahweh. That lines up with the Chet. Chet is a big white fence. Tet, that's like a potter's wheel. It goes round and around. Yod, the hand of the Creator. All three of these line up with like Pesach saying, Yahweh said, I redeemed you from your taskmasters, the tyrants who overlorded you in Egypt. I have brought you out. I called you my own. I am now your master. I own you. And if you don't like it, see ya, you're out of here. Only those in the kingdom are those who say, whatever you say, what is it? What do you want us to do? That's who's in the kingdom. Next thing, Kaf Lamed, the Torah, it's the barbecue grill, the filter and the pump, heart and the kidneys, as it were, where you say, this stuff belongs, this stuff doesn't. Learn his ways. Push and pull, like the heart pumping, teach and learn. These things are part of the kingdom, those things aren't. What are the mechanisms of justice? How do you treat your neighbor? How do you regard Yahweh? Oh, what's the seventh day? Is the seventh day the first day, or is it the seventh day? Is it any day? Does it matter? Oh, yes, it matters. How do you do it? Teach and learn, teach and learn. Go through that. Once you get that, then you got the Mem Nun, which is like the laver, which basically is like when he spoke plant life into the earth, where it's a matter of gestation, pregnancy, incubation. Take these matters in your heart, and as you keep them, and as they develop, they will bring forth something. What do they bring forth? The Nun, and it's going to bring forth whatever you put in. Women, when you're pregnant, if you're drinking booze and taking drugs and smoking cigarettes and doing all these crazy things to harm you, your system, what goes in gets harmed, and what comes out is harmed. And that's what learning his ways are like. What becomes of us, what we produce, is what goes in, and how we nurture his word. And as we said during the week of Noon, you could say, well, how does this model fit? If he puts his word in us, does it bring forth another life form, like giving birth to another human, like a baby? Or is it kind of like the caterpillar, where what you take in, you're nurturing and developing, but when you die, when you go into that chrysalis, dormant state, as it were, when you come back to life on the last great day and you go, whoop, And you realize you've become the butterfly that was with the caterpillar, and everything the caterpillar ate is what the butterfly is. And if you can't fly because you ate a bunch of stuff and it was no good and you didn't nurture, you're going to have one heck of a future which isn't going to work. You won't be able to fly, as it were, to play with the metaphor. What I'm saying is, it's in our own best interest to regard these things. If what is birthed, or what happens unto eternity, remember the letter Nun is one of the Sophite letters, as is the letter Mem. This stuff is unto eternal regard. I don't know anything about Mormon theology, but I do remember hearing a story once that the Mormons have this thing about maybe in the eternal realm, they each get to have a galaxy. Is that such a far beyond the realm of possibility? We saw these pictures of these stars. There's more than we can even count. How many people are on the face of the earth? What if the creator of the heavens and the earth says, tell you what, gang, each one of you get one of those? And guess what? In that if the festivals are models of Yahweh's eternal design, he says 3 times a year, no matter how far you are away in your galaxy, doing whatever you're doing, you get to come back to the New Jerusalem and we'll have Sukkot together. Wouldn't that be a blast? I mean, think about that. These patterns are eternal regard. We're so temporal-minded. Can the caterpillar possibly imagine what it's like to be a butterfly? He's chewing on grass. He's being careful not to be, stepped on by somebody walking, and he's just staring at leaves all the day. And he finally crawls into this little cocoon he makes. Does he know he's going to become a butterfly? Does he look up and see a butterfly and say, boy, I'm going to be one of those one day? Or does he crawl into the thing, thinks he's dead, and all of a sudden, whoop, his consciousness now, he's flying around, and he's not eating leaves anymore, he's drinking nectar. Drinking nectar and looking like a butterfly, these beautiful things, a whole different thing. They're pictures. And Yahweh's promise in the Samecx is that he has designed this thing with wings. If we choose to regard the stuff out in the field, on the grass, Kaf Lamed Mem Nun, then in the secret place, this is what's waiting for us. The menorah was the light in the meeting place. There's this picture of the adult insect, you might say, with the wings in the Samecx. If you put all these words together, try to get a vision of the high calling to be one of Yahweh's, like I said before, one of his chess pieces, one of his special inventions. He designed humanity. He designed Israel, he said, to be the apple of his eye. He designed it in a certain verse where he doesn't just mention Israel, he mentions Ephraim to be the firstborn who he loves. You say, Ephraim wasn't the firstborn. Ephraim was the secondborn of Joseph, and Joseph wasn't even the firstborn. There was 3 others born of Leah, but it's like Jacob had a regard of Joseph, who was the firstborn of the wife that he really loved. And you could say, hey, there's all this kind of family issues going on. Regardless of all that, Yahweh has a special place for Ephraim. And if we read in the scriptures, Ephraim hasn't come back. A guy was telling me just the other day that there's a certain Rabbi Fell, I think they said that Stephen Collins was talking about, a Jewish guy, making a big hubbub over in Israel, trying to tell people, Ephraim has to come home. Look, it's in the scriptures. And everybody's kind of ignoring it. I never heard it in the Christian church. The 2,730-year curse. For us to come back is not to sit there and say, hey, we got to ride on the gravy train. Free tickets for the gravy train. Just kick back and look at the sky. It's like, this is serious work. The purpose of this is to say, we need to be diligent about what Yahweh said to do. The picture of the Samecx set up in the Samecx Ayin Pei is that the 3 work together. In Micah 6:8, years ago, I remember like all this learning of all these things. It's like, what's the bottom line? Why didn't he make it simple? Is there no place in the entire Bible that he just says, here it is in a nutshell, this is it? Out of all the New Testament writings, out of the Torah and the 613 commandments and all the prophets and the writings and all this stuff, David and Solomon and the great words of wisdom, it's like, come on, what do you want? Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, what is good and what Elohim requires of you. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim. Wait a minute, what about believing Jesus? What about going to heaven? What about having your sins forgiven? What about all that other stuff? What about the 613 laws? Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim. What about the Savior? Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim. What does that mean? I would maintain that in these three images of the Samecx, Ayin, Pei is the explanation of what that means. Take them in order. Samecx, do justly. Well, here you have the model of the good steward doing justly in his position of watching over the field. Well, how can I say that's the good steward? According to the chart in the back, we have these different patterns lined up. And as I've tried to maintain, that these patterns are consistent throughout Scripture. So if you look at the Beatitudes, and you run through the Beatitudes, this particular position lines up with, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. What does that got to do with the trumpet or the stars? The menorah was filled with oil to produce its fruit, which is light. The trumpets are filled with breath to produce their fruit, which is sound. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst to be filled. Hunger and thirst after what? After righteousness, for they shall be filled. In the Lord's Prayer, the same pattern holds, and it's in the position of, give us this day our daily bread. So the suffering is to overlap these patterns on each other. If you look at the commandment in the Ten Commandments about the Sabbath day, there's something very interesting. That one commandment, there's a list of who should regard it. And I would maintain that this list of who should regard it fits the Mishkan pattern. It says, you, that's who's supposed to regard the Sabbath day. You. Okay, let's go to the Mishkan pattern. Who is you? The first piece of the pattern is the big white fence. You are supposed to be like the big white fence. You are supposed to look like the kingdom of heaven to anybody in the darkness. When you were in darkness, did you not feel the void? He said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's the first of the Beatitudes. If you don't think you're in darkness, you have no lack, you don't feel any poverty, you could care less about any kingdom of heaven. But when you sense your poverty, you know your lack, you determine your void, and you look and you see the big glowing big white fence of the Mishkan and say, there's my relief, there's my refuge, there's my hope. You look to the big white fence, which is the four colors, blue, purple, red, with white linen, Yod, He, Vav, He, this is his kingdom. You turn to the kingdom. That's the big white fence. You, keeping the Sabbath day, are supposed to look like the big white fence to everybody else in the world who is in the darkness and the bondage and the domination of others besides Yahweh, to themselves, to their own issues, or to other taskmasters. You represent, keeping the Sabbath day, the big white fence to everybody else. Then it says your son. The next piece of the Mishkan pattern was the altar of sacrifice. Your son, a good son, keeps the instructions of his father. If you want to be Yahweh's son, you keep his instructions. You teach and learn the Torah. Yeshua was called good because he did what his father said, and he taught and learned the Torah. That's the only standard of a good son. Then he says your daughter lines up with the laver. Remember, the laver was made out of the mirrors of the women. The women are the ones that get pregnant who bring forth. It all has to do with, here's the son, the altar of sacrifice, and here's the daughter, the laver. What would you expect of your daughter? Virtue, to be clean, to be chaste, chaste. The virtue of bringing forth a reflection of yourself. This isn't a gender thing, this is a type thing. So even the men, if you were Yahweh's daughter, what do you expect that he would want of you? Think of the laver, think of the things in Mem and Nun, to bring forth one of his own name, of his own character, of his own aspect by regarding his instructions and believing his promises. Remember, Mem and Nun have to do with believing promises, like in the books of Joshua and Judges, where he was so upset that he didn't get mad at him for not keeping the instructions. He got mad at him for not believing what he said would happen. I'll be with you. I'll whoop your enemies. I'll clean out the land. And they wouldn't believe, so they made deals with the foreign nations because they didn't believe him. And he says, how long? How many times do I have to tell you what I care for about you? Because Mem Nun also speaks of his nurturing care for us. The next thing on the list was your servant. Well, the next thing on the list is the menorah. The next thing in the pattern, your servant. What do you expect of a good servant? Any of you guys are bosses? Any of you guys say to your servant, here's the tools, here's what I expect you to do. I'm going to the store, I'm going to go get lunch, I'll come back. If you come back, oh wait, I forgot something. You come back and you see everybody sitting around. You go, why are you guys sitting around? Oh man, we're just thinking of that lunch you're going to bring. Listen, there ain't going to be no lunch if you guys don't get busy. I told you what to do, and I do it. When you come back, you expect to see your servants busy. If we are to be his menorah, we should be his good servants. It all lines up. The next one was your maidservant. It's in the position of the iron. It's in the position of the table of showbread. It has to do with the beatitude of blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. It has to do with compassion and provision, what you might expect of a caregiver or a nurse or something that we generally associate with a feminine occupation. And again, this isn't a gender thing. This is a type thing. The next thing on the list was the cattle within your jurisdiction. Your animals? What has that got to do with the letter Pei? It has to do with those of your family, those of your household. And then the last thing was the stranger within your gates. It's in the position of the Ark of the Covenant, the position of the Zadi, in the position of, you might say, the type of the hope set before us. And it's like, what does the stranger within our gates have to do with us? We are strangers within his gates, that he is allowed to come into his stuff, and he says, don't muck it up. Clean yourself and do what I say. You're a stranger within my gates. Do you have no regard? It's like, so we see this pattern, and the thing that fits is the good steward. The position of the menorah is not just the son, not just the daughter, but there's these different aspects of how he has showed us how he wants us to regard his stuff. So if you could say, hey, listen, the son's his son. He doesn't have to do what he says. He's just a son. It's like, well, then think of yourself as his servant. Think of yourself as his maidservant. Think of yourself as his beast of burden. Think of yourself as the stranger within his gates. They're all pictures which he has gave us. You see, he has designed the structure. He has designed the structure of who Israel is. If you look in Deuteronomy 32, it says that he has designed the borders of the nations around Israel. We've mentioned this other times. According to the number of Israel, according to the Sefer of Israel. The Sefer, the number, there's 12 tribes, so okay, these 12 tribes fit here and there, and all the other nations fit around them because they take up a certain amount of room, or is it according to the story of Israel? What's the story of Israel? He gave Israel the blessing and the curse and said, you do this or you do that and you'll get this or you'll get that. Could it be that the entire history of the earth plays out according to the disposition of the 12 tribes of Israel, how they choose to regard the Brit? Do you choose to be an Ish of the Brit, a man of the Brit? So here's one thing that we've done each week, is tried to show the different things with different shirts. As you notice, I wore this last week, okay? This is the menorah. It represents the Samecx. Last week we were doing Nun Samecx, a combination of the Nun and the Samecx at a place of rest. So we did kind of a recap of everything between the spring feast and the fall feast. A lit menorah is kind of a Nun Samecx. Does anybody know how to read these words? Say it louder. Gabor la Yahweh. Does anybody know what that means? You must know what it means, Dieter. What is it? Mighty unto Yahweh. Now, what does that mean? Remember, we looked up the word before. He strengthened himself. The letter lamed can mean by, or of, or in reference to, or you might say, given over to. He strengthened himself by Yahweh. He is mighty and valiant according to Yahweh. So here I had this idea. You know, you see police written on the back of somebody's shirt, or sheriff, or FBI, or ATF. What should we have written on the back of our shirt? Gabor la Yahweh. What more can you aspire to? If you're going to strengthen yourself unto what? And this, again, it's not a gender thing. It's not male or female. It's Jaja Gabor, Eva Gabor, right? They were females, right? Gabor la Yahweh. My point is, if we think of these ideas, it's like, wow, if somebody had to have a label on us, if you were accused of being a Gabor la Yahweh, would there be enough evidence to convict you? It's also something to aspire to. It's like, man, you know, I better not write this name on my back and then do stupid things. I'll insult him. Maybe he'll break my candlestick off. I don't know. I want to show you something in Zechariah 4. We're talking about the Samecx and about the menorah. Somebody asked about the 22 cups. It's in Exodus 37:19, where it talks about the 3 cups. We'll not go there. I'm just mentioning it for the sake of location. So if we go to Zechariah chapter 4, here it is. The angel who was speaking with me returned and woke me as a man is awoken from his sleep. And he said, "What do you see?" I said, "Behold, there is a menorah of gold with its bowl on top." Its bowl on top? What does that mean? It talks about 3 cups, which are kind of like bowls, and there was 3 on each of the 6 and 4 in the middle. I don't know what this means. It's bowl on top. Its 7 lamps are upon it, and there are 7 ducts for each of the lamps. There are 2 olive trees over it, one at the right of the bowl and one on its left. I spoke up and said to the angel who was speaking to me, saying, "What are these, my Lord?" The angel was speaking to me, answered and said, "Do you not know what these are?" I said, "No, I don't know what these are." "This is the word of Yahweh to Zerubbabel, saying, not through army and not through strength, but through my spirit, says Yahweh Zavot." This says Yahweh, Master of Legions, but we discussed last week the word Zadi Bet Aleph Vav Tav. Zadi Bet Aleph is army or host or legion, but Zadi Bet means to inflate, like a turtle's back is inflated. And Aleph Vav Tav is an oath or something you're sworn to, a sign or symbol, just like the letters Nun Samecx. That's a symbol, that's an oath. So Aleph Vav Tav also means a letter of the alphabet. You'll see that in the dictionary, though you won't find that in Strong's Concordance. So you could say the Master of Legions, is that like hosts of angels and all kinds of creatures in outer space that we can't imagine of, and the insects and the dinosaurs and the fish and the birds and the maker of all? It might be, but it might be saying also, I am Yahweh who inflates every letter of my alphabet to its full potential. Every letter of its alphabet, what does that mean? It's because every letter of the alphabet represents something that he chose to do and to portray about himself and to create. So in the Jewish thing is to say, the scholars, the sages say, he created the universe with the letters of the alphabet. And it's like, what does that mean? It's kind of esoteric, and you don't know what it means. But if you say, listen, if we knew what the letters of these alphabet were, when he inflates every one, that's his mission accomplished. For us to regard what he's doing and say, take these little things that have no regard and start looking at them and start to inflate them, is the doing of what he's all about. But let me go on a little bit. Let's jump down here to verse 14, actually verse 11. You go back one. The eyes of Yahweh, they scan the whole world. You see, Yahweh's looking across the face of the earth. What is he looking for? Righteousness? What is righteousness? What is righteousness? A pure heart doing what? doing what he said. What did he say? Do you know what he said? Do you read Hebrew? Do you know what he really said, or do you know what people tell you that he said? Don't take my word for it. Read the words yourself. You've got to learn these words so that you can do what he said, so you can be considered righteous. Oh, but we're bequeathed righteousness by the blood of Yeshua. No, we're decontaminated by the blood of Yeshua. Righteousness, zadikah, is doing what he said. You see, now we're getting into the doctrines and the scramble of words, but that's another matter. The point is here, he says, what are these two olive trees on the right of the menorah and on its left? I spoke up a second time to him and said, what are the two clusters of olives that are next to the two golden pressers that are pouring golden oil from themselves? An interesting thing I heard once, that the oil that you put in this menorah was not just eddy oil. You don't just go down to 7-Eleven and buy some oil and dump it in. When you plucked an olive off a tree, it gave up one drop of oil of its own volition as you pulled it off. The rest had to be squeezed out. From what I understand, they gathered that first drop of oil that was volitionally yielded by each olive and collected it, and that's what they used to put it in the menorah. Volitional. Do you know what these are? And I said, no, my Lord. He said, these are the two anointed men who are standing by the Lord of all the land. And so I was looking at this just the other day. It's like, these are the two anointed men. Which two anointed men who are standing by the Lord of all the land? We're running out of time, so I'm going to go over this quickly. What it really says is Allah, Aleph Lamed Hey, which is an oath, or a curse, or an obligation by oath, like a vow, like an Aleph Vav Tav, right? Vayomer, Allah. Shani, that's the letter two, the word two. Beni, well, that's the words my son. But remember, Bet Nun is also where we get the word bone, which is like timber frame structure, which is like the way you build something. Bean means between, like a bridge. Ha Itzahar, which means bright, clear, shining, or that which declares. And then the word is Ha Amadim. The word Amad, Ayin Mem Dalet, means like standing columns. Two men are standing. It says two structural beni, it could be my children, my sons, standing columns. Ayin lamed, if you look in the Red Dictionary, it means a yoke, or that which is above or next to or beside or on account of. It's something else in reference to somebody else, something else. And then the word is Adon. Oh, Adon, that's like Adonai, like my master. But Adon literally means I will, and then Dalet Vav Nun has to do with determine, to judge or determine, or to, okay, this is going to happen. Okay, that's going to happen. And then the word is Kol Haaretz, or all the earth. It doesn't say two men are standing. Let's look back. Let's try to separate these dots. What two things, beni, structures, bone, like my children are supposed to be, which two things that I have said to my children are like columns which stand, that upon which the judgments or the determining factors of all the earth are dependent on? Let me back up one more time here. We've been looking at the spelling of words by looking at the letters. But each letter is like a picture, like a word, like a hieroglyphic. So then each letter itself is a bunch of words like that you have to sepher, like they're swarming around like one of these constellations, like one of these galaxies. Each letter is like this galaxy of all these different things going on, and you're trying to get the grasp. You see, if you look at a picture of one of these galaxies, they all look kind of different, but you're not seeing a galaxy. You're seeing a moving, living, swarming mass of stars that give a certain appearance. Each letter's like that. But then you combine the different letters in the words, and then you get the feeling of the word. But then you combine the different words in the sentence, and you get a feeling like looking back at this spiral galaxy of a sentence. An interesting thing, there's the Horsehead Nebula. There's a picture of it there, and it looks like there's these projected monument sort of stalagmite shapes. I went to hear a guy speak about astronomy once years ago, and he was talking about that specifically. He says, that's not what that is. What they've determined to find out is that there's a solid mass, like a rock, at the tip, and that somehow invisibly in outer space there's these forces of winds that are blowing against that rock, and the dust that comes off the rock are forming what looks like these giant pillars. It's the inverse of what you think. It's not something standing up. It's something that's solid, that's being washed away. It's like, gosh, how did they figure this stuff out? What Yahweh has made is astounding. It's all the perspective of what we have. So if you step back and you look at these pictures of these words based on the letters, it's like, what two things standing next to the menorah, next to the symbol of the architecturally engineered, organized structure that determines, like the columns upon which everything else is based on, that govern the entire world, the whole earth, that has something to do with his Son. What two things? Does anybody want to venture a guess? Shema, hear and obey. Hear and obey or else? The blessing of the curse? I'm just trying to sefer. I'm just trying to connect some dots here. But what this looks like to me is that Yahweh says, I have chosen to reveal myself to my special people, Israel, 12 tribes. They each have a place, like each one of the constellations in their houses at certain times of the year, the Moedim, like each one of the festivals in its place, like each one of the arms on the menorah. Read about Revelation. Read about this picture in Zechariah chapter 4 about the menorah. And Yahweh said, each tribe has their own place, like each one of the chessmen has their own abilities and capabilities, and you're strategically move them here or there. We're going to do a study later on about, it's actually, we're going to talk about it at the Torah to the Tribes meeting coming up in August 12th, where I'm going to look at what Moshe said to each of the 12 tribes, not just to say, oh, here's a prophecy regarding it, but what about if Moshe was establishing jurisdictional responsibilities? Yehuda, for example, means now I praise Yah. What if the tribe of Yehuda was simply in charge of maintaining accurate dynamics of praising Yah? Have they done it? They've kept his Torah. Here we have it, thanks to brother Yehuda, the tribe of Yehuda, they've maintained this. What have the other tribes done? I don't know. What were they supposed to do? I don't know that either. Why not? Because we haven't regarded the words. So one branch of the menorah maybe has been doing something about what it was supposed to do. What about the rest of them? What if there was one house of the constellations that was up there in the sky you could look at and you had no clue about the rest of them? Could you find your way in the dark? We are supposed to be the light of the world to those in the dark that either want to come in from the darkness to the kingdom of Yahweh, and those who have learned the instructions and really reckon with the promises and have nurtured his word to bring forth an offering unto him, like a bringing forth the noon. We have the responsibility, those of us who have learned, to be the light in the Kadosh place as a good servant of his word over the field, cultivating what he chose to be the expanse of all he would possess. Again, think about this. Out of all he chose to possess, he declared that a man of Israel who would regard his word is the pinnacle, the Alphi. The Alphone is a mentor, an intimate friend, is to teach others about this language. The more these words you look at, and again, we're running out of time here, I could show you all these other words I was looking at this week. And the thing is, each word, you can open it up and look at it. Like each one of these galaxies is different. Each one of us has a certain capacity that nobody else has. Certain shoes to fill that are of Yahweh's design, that it's his good pleasure to say, he specifically designed the measure of the full expanse of all that he would choose to call his own possession. It's like this stuff is so incredible. And to think, no one's ever talked about this before. I've never heard about this stuff in my whole life. Why now? Why us? His timing? His timing to give us right now? Is there any chance? There's a word, we're running out of time. There's a word that means perchance to meet. The word makra kadosh, the word makra, cry, call, invoke, invite, to proclaim, to read, to summon, and be named, and to be taught to read. It's in Leviticus 23:34. The appointed Moedim, the appointed gathering, of which Yom Teruah is one, the first one of the 7th month, the first of the fall feasts, which are a picture of the second coming of Yeshua, whereas the first coming was portrayed by the spring feast. Michael Rood talked about that, the spring feast compared to the fall feast. Mikra Kadosh is the appointed gathering, the commanded summoning, but it's also being taught to read the Kadosh, the set apart, the sanctified, the pure. That's what this is. Any of you that are here or that are listening are being summoned and invited by Yahweh Himself to be taught to read and to be given a name of the Alphi of Israel. What an incredible call.